Whenever someone brings up the idea of a Squid Game USA version, the reaction is usually negative. People say it would never work, that America would ruin it, or that it would completely miss the point. But I actually think the opposite. In this video, I'm breaking down why a US version of Squid Game could be great, if it's done right. The United States is far more culturally diverse than Korea, which means there's huge potential to explore a wider range of social issues, like student debt, healthcare, racial injustice, and the prison industrial complex. A US version could also take a hard look at the myth of the American dream, the idea that anyone can succeed if they just work hard enough, and expose how broken that promise really is for millions of people. We'd also get a brand new set of childhood games that feel nostalgic to American viewers, but with deadly twists. And most importantly, we'd see how the Squid Game concept plays out in a completely different social and cultural environment. There's so much story potential here, and I truly believe it could take the franchise to a whole new level. And here's the exciting part. There are rumors that David Fincher might direct the US version. Everything he touches turns to gold. Just to name a few of his iconic works: Fight Club, Gone Girl, Zodiac. Se7en, for example, mirrors the dark, twisted atmosphere of Squid Game. Years after watching that film, I still can't shake the scene where Brad Pitt's character opens that box in the final act. It haunts me to this day. I'm confident that if David Fincher were to take this on, he'd do it justice. He'd stay true to the core of the show, and I think audiences would be far more impressed by how Squid Game USA turns out than they initially expect. Now, for those who say Netflix just wants to milk the franchise dry and that this would ruin the show, I share some of that skepticism. I agree. It's ironic that a show designed to critique capitalism has itself become a capitalist product. But I also believe Netflix would try to make the spin-off as good as possible, precisely because they want to keep milking it. And let's be real, if a Squid Game spin-off drops, we're all going to watch it, no matter how much we say we won't. The only thing I'm genuinely worried about is casting. I hope they don't bring in major A-list celebrities because that would ruin the essence of the show. Hwang Dong-hyuk did an amazing job casting relatively unknown actors, which made the characters feel more relatable. For example, Sae Byuk was Young Ho-yeon's first acting role. Now imagine if they cast someone like Leonardo DiCaprio as Gi-hun. It would feel completely off. If they want to include big names, I think it would make more sense to cast them as VIPs. That would actually add another layer, showing how wealth and fame can warp your sense of fun. Another thing I hope they avoid is turning the story into some cheap imitation of the Korean original or leaning too hard on nostalgia. I've seen people speculating that Gi-hun's daughter would become a player and continue what her father started. If that happens, it would honestly be the worst direction they could take. It would be a lazy, cliché move that could seriously damage the franchise. The only way I could see Ga-young being involved in a meaningful way is if she became a detective investigating her father's disappearance and the mysterious 45.6 billion won in his name. But even that feels like a stretch. The latest complaint I've seen online comes from people who say the US version of Squid Game would just be a cheap imitation of the Korean original, that they'd simply reuse the same games but with an American twist. The main reason for this concern seems to be the US recruiter playing ddakji with a homeless man, which led many to assume the games themselves would also be copied and Americanized versions of the Korean ones. But that's not how it works. The US version wouldn't feature Korean games, it would feature American ones. In every country where the Squid Game is played, the focus is on that specific culture. The games are adapted from traditional childhood games that are unique to each region. Every folklore has its own version of red light, green light, tug of war, or marbles, but they're deeply tied to local culture and customs. That's why we'd get a completely new set of games. I do believe they'd keep red light, green light, because of how iconic it is to the franchise, but with a twist. For example, instead of Young-hee, we might see a creepy Uncle Sam doll. And maybe the playground would have ironic banners like Land of the Free, highlighting the contradiction of people being trapped in a deadly game while supposedly living the American dream. it would serve as a satire of how people are drowning in debt and desperation, all while being told they live in a land of opportunity. I'll talk more about the possible games in the second part of this video. Trust me, there's a wide variety they could draw from, and many are deeply tied to American culture and history. Now back to the ddakji scene that sparked all this backlash. People were outraged. Why are they playing a Korean game in America? Or, what does ddakji have to do with US culture? But if we put our biases aside, ddakji actually makes a lot of sense as a recruitment game, even in the US. America is the most culturally diverse country in the world, and that makes its setting uniquely compelling. The players are specifically targeted, people who have hit rock bottom with no realistic way out of their situations. They're so desperate that they're willing to risk their lives in a deadly game for a chance at financial redemption. ddakji is incredibly easy to learn and can be played anywhere. So if someone in a desperate situation is offered the chance to win $1,000 just by flipping an envelope, with the only risk being a few slaps to the face, they'd take that deal in a heartbeat. Honestly, even I would take that offer, and I'm not in debt. The real issue isn't with ddakji itself. In fact, it's arguably the perfect recruitment game. Simple, visual, memorable. It could even serve as a subtle tribute to Il-nam, the original creator of the games. The problem is that people see the ddakji scene and assume that the main competition will also reuse Korean games, just slightly altered for a US setting. And if that were the case, I'd agree. It would be a miserable failure. But that's not what's going to happen. The Korean game is just used as part of the recruitment process. Once the actual competition begins, we'd see an entirely new set of games drawn from American childhood traditions. I truly believe the US has the best diversity and cultural backdrop for a series like this. It gives the creators a bigger, richer pool to work with. Just imagine the range of social commentary David Fincher could explore. The illusion of the American dream, predatory capitalism, crushing medical debt, the immigration crisis, student loans, veteran homelessness, religious moral dogma, the list goes on. The potential is golden, and if done right, this version could come very close to rivaling Season 1 of the original Squid Game. Just imagine the kinds of characters we could see. A young single mother who used to be a teacher, now working multiple jobs and drowning in medical debt after her daughter's surgery. A former Wall Street broker who lost everything in a financial scandal, ruthless, intelligent, and manipulative. Twin siblings raised in foster care, surviving by hustling tourists with street performances. A decorated veteran now sleeping on the streets, begging just to get a meal. As I said before, the potential is immense. I also believe people would feel more connected to this version because the struggles would hit closer to home. While Squid Game Season 1 primarily focused on the gambling problem, the US version could dive into more emotionally charged and socially relevant issues. The only real challenge? Whether Americans are willing to face that kind of mirror held up to their society, and whether Netflix would allow such a raw, unfiltered critique. That's the big question. Will they expose America for what it truly is for so many people struggling to survive? This is one of the core problems with Hollywood storytelling, the obsession with happy endings and self-glorification. Hollywood often portrays America as the center of the world, where nothing truly bad happens. Squid Game, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. It thrives on realism, on exposing uncomfortable truths, and I hope David Fincher won't be constrained by Hollywood's usual playbook. I hope he's given the freedom to explore this story in the way he sees fit. I really hope they keep things authentic, staying true to the core message of the original. Simple children's games with deadly consequences. That brutal contrast is what gave Squid Game its power. I worry they might try to go too flashy or over the top with the games, losing what made the original so impactful. While the games were visually exciting, the real focus of Season 1 wasn't the games. It was the human relationships and how people change under extreme pressure. That emotional core needs to stay intact in the US version. One thing I deeply admired about the Korean show was its portrayal of characters. They weren't one-dimensional heroes or villains. They were layered, flawed, and real. Each character had a backstory, a reason for being there. And honestly, I don't think American screenwriters often reach the same depth in character development. That nuanced writing is something I hope they strive to match. Still, it would be fascinating to see this concept unfold in an entirely different cultural environment. As for the games, the possibilities are wide open. Imagine a deadly version of musical chairs, or dodgeball, except the ball could literally kill you. Imagine players running through a maze or a wide field, being chased by a giant rolling boulder that crushes anyone who's too slow, or playing hopscotch on a high-altitude platform where the tiles are so tiny that one wrong step sends you plummeting to your death. There are so many creative directions this could go in. In conclusion, I genuinely believe that if it's done properly, an American version of Squid Game could rival even Season 1. The cultural diversity, the rich potential for meaningful social commentary on medical debt, student loans, racism, homelessness, and more, and the endless game ideas all combine to form the perfect ingredients for success. The only thing that could ruin it would be trying to imitate the Korean version too closely. The American spin-off should stand on its own, a completely separate event, with new characters, new games, and a new thematic focus. If it carves its own path, it has the potential to be truly great. At the end of the day, a US version of Squid Game doesn't need to be a copy. It can be something bold, fresh, and just as powerful. If it embraces America's unique struggles and stories, it could bring something truly meaningful to the franchise. Let's just hope they get it right.